neither side is to blame. I believe what is to blame is patriarchy and capitalism. So patriarchy is a system that has built the state that then therefore built the religious system for the last 6,000 years. It took about 4,000 years for it to solidify into the state and another 2,000 years for it to solidify into the religious system. Change comes not from the novelty of the future, but from the realization of the thoughts of the past. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to get out of the blame game of the other side. Was it the Republicans? Was it the Democrats? Was it the people that voted independent and third party? How do we stop getting in the weeds and stop blaming each other, while also still really understanding that this is very important that we tune into and listen to and learn from both sides and how we move forward? That is what we're going to address today in the best way I can. It's just the foundation of what I'm doing with my work here. I have been on both sides, and I'm going to go into my story here in a second. But first, if you haven't been to my channel, this is the Sacred Profane Co. Over on Substack, it is the Dance of the Sacred Profane. What I am doing here with this channel is I'm challenging, questioning, and reimagining the cultural norm, or the status quo, if you will, by learning the cultural stories, both the creation stories and our spiritual stories, through the lens of big H history. The difference between big H versus little h is big H incorporates all perspectives of history, both told and untold, where little h is that history told that we learned probably in high school, or history classes or sociology classes, and it's the lens that we are taught from the victors of history who got to tell the stories and pass down the indoctrination from there. If that sounds of something of interest to you, then please subscribe, link, like, hit the little bell so you can be told of when the new videos are, and watch the entire video. I am on my way to monetization. I'm also going to be doing a series about how I am leaving my pursuit of a corporate career, which really hasn't happened because of so many things, because of being a woman who decided to stay home from her corporate job to become a full-time mother. Besides that, I am jumping into full-time content creation, writing a historical book, flipping the whole script on its head about who the Christ really was, not Jesus. Gonna give you a little Easter egg there. I'm documenting that journey so you can see how long it takes me to get monetized, which means I have to have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time just to get there. So who this video is for and who it's not for. If you are deep right or deep left, you probably are not going to be interested in this. However, I would encourage you to listen anyways, because I am not on either side. I am taking a Switzerland approach and trying to stay in that as much as possible, because I do not believe it's either side that really is causing the issues right now. Just a caveat. As I'm starting to put myself out there, I am starting to get the MAGA men to comment and make their little gestures at me and try to get me to shut up, because I am now a powerful woman using my voice who they do not like. And that is exactly what I'm trying to take down, is the patriarchy. Well, not take down personally, but trying to educate all of us to understand that that's what's happening. So whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it, because it's just going to help me in the end. Just now, I'm not going to waste my time or my energy trying to respond to you, except give you a little thanks, because then that helps my algorithm too. Yeah, I know, I'm just too emotional about this, aren't I? Anyways, who this video is for, though, is if you find yourself on either side saying, kind of tired of the sides, this has been tried now for 150 years at least in our country, and it's not working, and you want something different, if you just feel in your bones that we're missing something, that you want an approach that really brings in humanity, and you want something else besides humans to blame, then this video and this series and this channel and all of the work I'm putting out is going to be for you. Especially, I would say, if you are coming out of a right-wing evangelical background as a woman, definitely probably for you. If you're a midlife woman with potentially perimenopause and potentially ADHD, then I am probably a great spot for you to be on the internet. So the foundation of my belief system, having been on both sides and then being on no side for about 12 years, is that neither side is to blame. I know that's not going to be a lot of the stuff I'm going to say is not going to be super, super popular, but it needs to be said. I believe what is to blame is patriarchy and capitalism. Those are the two things to blame. Patriarchy came first, and if you've been reading my blog on Substack, you'll understand where I'm going with that. And then capitalism was birthed out of patriarchy. They have not been the natural order as we have known it for all of humanity, for all of time on this earth. There have been other themes and other systems that people lived under before we cultivated civilization and started to try to control one another. The things that are foundational to patriarchy and thus capitalism are violence, the violent control of other people to get them to acquiesce to the people that are in power's will. And therefore, we cannot use violence in any way, shape, or form. Maybe just with our language, as I did with the Nick Fuentes piece. And people told me, like, get over your anger. Well, no, we need to move through our anger, people. That's actually the healthy adult thing to do. And using language to do that is important. But violence, in general, is not the answer. If you try to create a system within the same energy that it was created, it just anchors in that system even deeper. Einstein's been attributed to that. I think I read it from Gandhi. I don't have the answers, but I do believe that we need to figure out a way how to get out of trying to do a violent revolt to take over what is happening now. If people are still on either side trying to do violence or trying to enact violent revolutions or violent overthrows, then that still means we're within patriarchy and it's not key. The second foundational, even before violence, to patriarchy and thus capitalism is ability to control another by a few select on top. This started with the control of the womb, but then trickled down to the control of people's psyche, i.e. through the media, but also, of course, slaves are put in there, understanding that women have been this unseen slave labor force to keep capitalism going. And I'm going to say that again. Foundational to patriarchy is learning how to control another human being by a select few. When I see any side trying to control body autonomy, it's a no-no for me. Both sides right now want to control the other side in one way, shape, or form around their health. So how did we get here? That is a great question. And I know a lot of smart people are asking that, but I think they're missing the point. Basically, how we got here is that first, there's hidden history that women and men have just started to uncover by really understanding what was happening pre-patriarchy. So patriarchy is a system that has built the state, that then therefore built the religious system for the last 6,000 years. It took about 4,000 years for it to solidify into the state, and another 2,000 years for it to solidify into the religious system. And now the two are enmeshed, even though our Constitution says they shouldn't be, they really are. And patriarchy, again, is the thing to blame, not each other. So I'm going to keep coming back to that. Until we learn the hidden structure that our stories, and if you don't want to believe their stories, then I don't know what to tell you, but stick with me and I'm going to point that out as we go along, not today per se, but as I develop this work and over on my Substack as well, you will really see that it's the stories, the cultural creation stories, the capitalism story, the American story of dominance. All of these stories have built upon each other with these invisible ideas from the past, from the beginning of patriarchy that started by learning how to control the womb. And then everything got built upon that. And learning to control the womb allowed people to learn how to control other, like the full person as a slave. So those are the really, really two big things. The other thing that I think as I'm looking around and taking a pulse of everything and then reading this book, this is a book, you can't see it backwards. No, you can. Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale, Women and the International Division of Labor. So that just simply means understanding how women's unseen labor of reproductive, not just through our wombs, but also the nurturing aspects of to keep society going, been unseen, unpaid labor force in order to create more capitalism and more patriarchy. The thing, as I've been reading this book, understanding that as I get a pulse of not just America, but the world, as I tune in, people are scared because they're waking up to realize the promises, the big promises that have been passed down generation to generation, the American dream that has gotten infiltrated into almost every other country, I think at this point, at least in Western civilization, or as we've colonized other countries, is failing us. It's failing us in a big, big way. A global pandemic just put a huge, big blockade in the way of us moving towards that American dream, right? So there's something in almost every 10 years that happens that puts us back. And we just, the last, I would say 20 years, 30 years maybe, we've been going backwards every 10 years. Like we'll have a couple steps forward, but like 20 steps back. And when I look at that and understand that capitalism, patriarchy, the promises that it makes for an easier, better life, we're all, whether we're conscious of it or not, are realizing it's a big fucking lie. And it's failing us in a big way. And what happens when people get scared? They revert back to what they know to be true. They go first into their, primal brain, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It's not just fight or flight, but it says other two as well. Where they feel safe, where people feel safe is generally when there's somebody of authority above them, even if it's not a healthy authority, telling them that it's all going to be okay. They're going to save the day. They are going to be the savior of the country, the world, their lives, their social, economic status, their spirituality. People feel more comfortable when they can just stop thinking, stop having to analyze, stop having to do the really difficult work of understanding history and what's happening, and falling back into that little child self of like, I've just got data. I've got a daddy to take care of me, because that's what patriarchy promises, right? That is where we are today, is we do not understand the secret hidden past of how patriarchy built on these thoughts that got quietly intermingled within the cultural story until they became invisible. And so we keep repeating the same things because we're not seeing what happened before all of these thoughts got embedded into our DNA, into our cultural stories and DNA. I've studied deeply. I don't know if I got it in this cut or not, but when I get interested in something, I go all in, hard, deep, wide, everything. Like I am passionately learning about it. I've studied history at this point, but history from the big H, not the small h. I've studied the history of Jesus from historical scholars, not from theological scholars, which is a huge difference, but from historical scholars of the New Testament, of the Old Testament, of that Near East ancient days. I've done a lot of classes, like in applied mythology, body language, NLP, which I don't really necessarily agree with anymore behind the science, but there's still some stuff I agree with. I've dipped my toe in a lot of different things, and just want you to know that as we're moving forward, I'm not just pulling from one thing. Again, I'm not pigeonholed into just thinking about history from a New Testament scholars' point of view or from a feminist point of view, but from a very wide range is what I'm pulling from. I'm going to go quickly into my story and what I feel gives me some credence in this subject matter. And then I'll do another video where I share more about my story, and probably other videos about my deconstruction story, not just from Christianity, but from hippy dippy spirituality as well as politics. So I started my life in the Midwest, so heavily influenced by Republican belief and Western
thought belief, which is patriarchy.
However, no religious upbringing. I did not have any religious upbringing until I was over 10, and I lived with guardians that were Episcopalian. So I was confirmed in the Episcopalian faith. About 19, I was introduced to Jesus in the evangelical form and had my first mystical experience. But because I didn't have any understanding of spirituality in general, it got lumped into Christianity. I was in Christianity for about 16 years. I had several more of those mystical experiences early on, but once I got indoctrinated into the evangelical way of thinking and looking and understanding the Bible and therefore Jesus through their lens, that those mystical experiences went away. And it was really frustrating for me, to be honest. And then I left Christianity after 16 years when I left my marriage, actually about a year and a half after I left my marriage. From there, I was an atheist for about 2 weeks before I was like, oh no, I'm just too esoteric and I just believe that there's something out there. So for the next eight and a half years, I spent in the what I call hippy dippy world of spirituality. So that involved a very feminine feminine, earth-based, pagan, I guess you would call, practice. Dipped my toe into magic, even though I never saw any of it to be true. It was fun. It was fun to play with, and it was fun to imagine and to do sagils, or I don't know. But to do spells and stuff was fun, but I never saw anything happen from them. So yeah, I was an atheist, hippy-dippy, new age, law of attraction, The Secret, all of that stuff up until about 3.5 years ago, at which point I just kind of fell out of all of spirituality because I just have this mind, and I now know that it's an ADHD mind, but I think a lot of us have very creative minds, whether you're ADD, ADHD or not, that just don't settle on anything and that question, and you can see through the holes and you see the mind gymnastics of a lot of these spiritual practices you have to play in order to stay in that belief system. And I was just done after 16 plus 8, so 24 years. I was just done trying to play all these mind gymnastics with myself when I saw like right through them all at the end of the day. But I loved mythology. I loved the idea of applied mythology to life, to our psyche, both collectively and individually. I created a new term for myself called spiritual atheist, which just simply means, yes, I'm atheistic in nature, meaning I don't know that there's a God. I don't think there's any credible evidence for a God or goddess or divine or universe or energy. I do believe that there's something that interconnects us all, and I think that can be explained through some science and physics, and just not knowing fully how science and physics yet can describe that. But I see the need for spiritual stories in order to create the cultural DNA that we grow up into and from, especially when it comes to our socioeconomic political system. So spiritual atheist is what I call myself. So is it possible to stay out of the weeds of they did it, no, they did it, no, the media did it, no, Trump did it, no, Kamala did it? Like, is it possible to stay out of those weeds? I'm not sure. Just as soon as I decide, like, I'm going to anchor down into my belief system, I'll hear something and I'm like, gosh, the left is right, the right is right. Like, but I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy to fluctuate and to allow yourself to take on a point of view to the point where you could see it to be true, and then step back into what you know is true for your ethics, your morals, your values. And that's how I approach these things. The one thing that I'm not going to be popular for, especially if you're coming over from the new evangelicals, but maybe because maybe you're over there just like me and you like their mission, and I love Tim and April and I love what they're doing, but I'm not a Christian, and I don't think holding to Christian ethics is the right argument to make. I think that is keeping us stuck and believing that there's this side of Christianity that is good, that Jesus, the red letter Jesus, you hear people say that is, the kind, the compassionate, the empathetic, the pacifist Jesus that they're using to support their side, still missing the big picture. And what is the big picture, y'all? It's patriarchy and capitalism, and the thoughts that have built the stories to build these structures, these systems into our cultural DNA is what we're missing. At the foundation of that, I'm going to say this again, was the few select people at the top learning to control the bodies of others, of the masses, for their own gain. That's at the foundation. When we stay in the argument that Jesus really was a good guy, we're missing that bigger picture. So I am not telling you not to practice your Christianity. I'm not telling you that it's wrong to see it the way you want to see it. I believe the historical Jesus is nothing like the red letter Jesus at all, but I'm not here to tell you what to practice. That is your own choice, because if I was here to tell you how to practice, then I'd be stepping into patriarchy, because that's trying to control you. So you are free to practice what you want. Do want to give you a quick overview of the historical Jesus. And this comes from Bart Ehrman, who is a New Testament historical scholar out of Duke University in North Carolina. I've done many of his books, ebooks, courses. The course how did Jesus become God was foundational. I mean, like, because it's helping me write the historical book about turning who we think the Christ is on its head. First and foremost, what we know about Jesus only comes from the four Gospels. Even with that, there's certain approaches to history that Bart teaches you in his courses to understand how we can know, not for fact, who Jesus was and what he said, but with probability. And there really isn't much probability that we can know about this historical Jesus. But what we do know is that there was a man who came from, the town of Nazareth in Judea or Israel. Israel was the northern part of what we think of Israel today, not beside the fact that he had these parents, that he became this apocalyptic preacher. And what that means is that he believed the end times were coming in his generation. Now sit with that for a minute. I mean, I know we hear that a lot of times, but people don't really get what that means. So he was preaching with this idea that there would be end times happening within his generation. And that meant that the God that he knew from the Torah was going to come onto this earth and supersede the power of the Roman in order to establish a godly kingdom according to the Torah. Now, there's a lot of other things that are built into this that we don't have the time to get into, but the view that Jesus was an egalitarian is not quite accurate historically. Stay tuned for more future uncovering of that. His following was pretty darn small during his day. And if you look at the writings of Paul and everybody else around that time who were, supposedly writing as witnesses, but a lot of that is even very skeptical that these were actual people that had walked with Jesus. It's just people using those names that we know of that probably wrote those scriptures. But anyways, besides the point, if you look at their writing, you can see that they were writing with the idea that the end times were happening. They look like a modern day cult, y'all. They were selling all of their possessions, piling all their money in together, moving into these big communes, trying to practice what Jesus said would be coming onto earth. Again, it wasn't really from this idea of egalitarianism that we think of today. It was from a Hellenistic Roman perspective of the first century. He wasn't popular. He dies. Something happens to explode his message. Well, not really explode. It was very slow growing at first, but there was these different sects. But there's lots of different sects with lots of resurrected gods over the centuries, not just Jesus, and a lot of different messages that were competing with Jesus's time. By the time Jesus showed up, patriarchy had been established for about 4,000 years. And I think that that's the part that I'm like, Bart, you're missing this. You're missing this piece. I'm like, who am I to tell a scholar on the New Testament that he's missing this piece? But Jesus was born into a Roman culture, even though it was Judaism, 4,000 years into patriarchy. So all of these thoughts that I've already mentioned were already built into the structure. So Jesus is operating in that system. He never claimed himself to be divine. That is something that came after he died. And take that course, how Jesus became God, and you'll understand this was very common back then to make humans into divine beings with a divine father and an earthly virgin mother. Jesus is not the only one. Anyway, so he came at just the perfect time, that when Constantine came on the scene about 300 years after Jesus, there was enough stir, there was enough upheaval in the kingdom, in the Roman culture, for Constantine to notice this Jesus. The state of patriarchy predated its march into patriarchy by about 2,000 years over religion. Constantine was already living in a day and age where it was very common for one male king to rule. So he used that idea of a one male true God to solidify the state of patriarchy. And that, about 330, if I get my dates right, Constantine did that somewhere around there, is what really solidified Jesus' story into patriarchy, and why we cannot use Jesus' story on either side to help undo patriarchy. Simple as that. So I'm going to read you this quote that I left on the New Evangelicals today, because I think it really drives home this point about why we cannot use Jesus on either side to solidify our argument, and why it's getting us stuck. Following Jesus as Lord and Savior, how is this any different than these white nationalists now saying Trump is anointed by God. Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher who believed in the end times ending the political structure of his day. Historically, he never claimed to be God or anointed by God. He provided a message to those few that listened while he was alive of hope for better days, out from under the oppression of the Romans, and that this was coming soon. His story morphed and morphed after his death until Constantine saw how beneficial one God story versus the pantheon of gods was to give him, Constantine, the story he needed to unify Rome just 300 years later under his rule. Since then, men have grown better and better at using this message to solidify patriarchal power of a few over the masses. We must understand how this unfolded in the system of patriarchy if we wish to move forward. And listening to this, I can hear that if we stick to trying to use Jesus to be a pacifist while they use him to create I can never say that word, authoritarianism, whatever that word is, 2,000 years from now, Trump will be called a prophet and a king. It is happening again. We must get away from this Jesus story because it is patriarchy, and patriarchy is the real issue we must address if we wish to move beyond this. So again, Jesus's story was used socio-politically in order to establish authoritarianism, there's the word, an authority for one king to rule. We cannot use the Jesus story. It's going to get us stuck. It's dangerous. It's just dangerous. I don't know how else to say this. Does it serve us to understand the other side? I'm still sitting with this question of, do I do this series on trying to help people understand the other side if they've never been on that other side to understand it in the first place? And I don't know. I'm a big maybe. I believe that when we do seek to understand things, that we do have the ability to grow our compassion for them. But I feel like people think that by understanding them, that's therefore an excuse to excuse their behavior. And that's not something I want to encourage or establish. So it's much like I came out of an abusive marriage and abusive, toxic relationships all around, many different cultish type things. So much of the literature around narcissism really fits this day and age and what we're seeing now. And there's this huge drive, I think, in people that have been in narcissistic relationships to understand narcissists. But the danger of doing that is then that they start to excuse the behavior of the narcissist instead of putting really firm boundaries in place. So again, I think it can grow your ability to be compassionate, which I think we need right now, and we need in big buckets. But with that compassion, we need to learn to have really strong boundaries so that we don't get pulled back in to the he said, she said, their blame, our blame, your blame, the right blame, the left blame. Like, we just need to stay out of that fight. The more we can stay out of that fight, the more we can go back and really uncover these hidden messages, these hidden thoughts from the past that have built the cultural stories of patriarchy, the better off we're going to be able to bring that forward into our own world individually, but also collectively. All right, y'all. So here's your chance to speak up. Do you want me to do this series? Do you want me to share everything that I have typed up already in a series breaking down? I think the best way to do it would be to break down the issues. But if I do that, and maybe even if I don't do that, I do want to go into cognitive dissonance and cognitive biases, because those play a huge, huge role, and they have really helped me to understand. Amanda Montell wrote a book, The Age of Magical Thinking, that was just released earlier this year. It's a great, easy read or a great, easy listen on Audible if you want to go grab that. But this really helped me to understand and to be looking out for my own cognitive biases, because that's what's happening is we're all getting stuck in our cognitive biases and then in our echo chambers with our cognitive biases. And again, I'm just going to be beating the dead horse here. Oh, I don't like that saying, beating the drum. We got to get out of, yes, understand the other person, but we've got to get out of that story and start looking at the systems to blame. The system is to blame. We need something to blame because that's just human nature, and it's the system of patriarchy and capitalism. Please leave your comments below. I really appreciate you making it through all of this. I know this was deep and big and wide, but leave me your comments. Let me know what you want to hear from me. Please stay tuned for the series that I will also be releasing hopefully starting this week, about why I've decided to leave my pursuit of corporate America in order to go all in as a middle-aged single mom with ADHD and perimenopause on my creativity, on my projects, and how that's going. I'm going to do a weekly update on how that's going. Please like, subscribe, hit the little bell because the bell helps you know when new videos are out so you can help me grow this channel, grow this message. I think this is so important. If you know of other people that are sharing similar ideas, I would like to know of them. I'm so in my own world right now creating that, I'm trying to keep a pulse out there, but if you can feed that to me in the comments, I will definitely reach out to those people too. I would love to find somebody to do a podcast with. I think bantering back and forth is really fun. But yeah, hit the subscribe, hit the like. That helps the algorithm feed this message out to more people. So thanks so much. Until next time, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks so much. Until next time.